In 2010, a single lapse in judgment set off a chain reaction inside the pawn shop that no one was prepared for. Chumlee was handling what appeared to be an unremarkable bass guitar, a routine item with an estimated pawn value of around $700. It looked harmless, ordinary, but when the instrument slipped from his hands and struck the floor, the damage was immediate and severe. The repair quote that followed drained the color from Rick Harrison's face. The figure was so staggering that Chumlee stood frozen, unable to form a single word. Rick's response was instant and explosive, a level of fury no one in the shop had ever witnessed. He pointed to the door and ordered Chumlee out on the spot. What unfolded after that moment fractured the shop's atmosphere for months. The incident was never shown on television, but among those who worked there, it became the most quietly discussed catastrophe in Pawn Stars history. To understand how Chumlee reached that moment, you have to go back much further, to the beginning of Austin Lee Russell's story. He was born on September 8, 1982, in a modest home in Henderson, Nevada. He was the second of 3 children in a family that constantly struggled to make ends meet. When his parents separated early in his childhood, the responsibility of holding everything together fell squarely on his mother's shoulders. She worked relentless hours, often juggling 2 or even 3 jobs at a time, just to keep the household running. She came home exhausted most nights, but she still tried to create a sense of stability for Austin and his siblings, Sage and Tara. With money always tight, she found small ways to survive. She would buy used items at garage sales and resell them for a little extra cash, sometimes just enough to cover rent or utilities. Austin watched closely as ordinary objects were transformed into necessities. Without realizing it, he was absorbing his first lessons in value. He learned that worth wasn't fixed, and that what seemed insignificant to one person could be essential to another. Those quiet observations laid the groundwork for the world he would one day step into. Through the suburbs of Las Vegas in the 1990s, Austin grew up much like any other kid. He loved video games, collected toys, and spent afternoons with friends after school. But even then, there was something different about how he saw things. While others focused on sports or cartoons, Austin wandered through garage sales with his mother, trading items and negotiating small exchanges to get what he wanted most. He had an instinct for what looked appealing and what someone else might be willing to pay for. It wasn't a career yet, but it was the beginning of a mindset that would define his future. At 10 years old, he learned a lesson that stayed with him for life. After saving money from small trades at school, he spent $50, a massive sum for a child, on what he believed was an authentic Mickey Mantle baseball card. To him, it felt like owning a piece of history. But when he showed it to a seasoned collector, the truth hit hard. The card was a fake. The disappointment was crushing, and the sting lingered for years. Yet that moment reshaped how he saw the world. It taught him that appearances can deceive, and that authenticity is everything. Later in life, behind the pawn counter, he would turn that childhood mistake into a cautionary tale for others. Around the age of 12, a friend's father looked at Austin's round face and jokingly compared him to Chumlee, the walrus from the old Tennessee tuxedo cartoons. Austin hated it at first, but once a nickname takes hold at that age, there's no shaking it. Soon, everyone was calling him Chumlee. What began as teasing slowly became part of his identity. Instead of resisting it, he embraced it, and the name eventually became one of the reasons people remembered him. A throwaway joke from the mid-1990s quietly evolved into a personal brand. Middle school was not kind to him. His nickname and appearance made him an easy target, but during those years, he found a way to fit in on his own terms. In the late 1990s, Pokemon cards exploded in popularity, and Chumlee quickly realized they could be bought, traded, and sold for profit. Without formal training, he began to understand supply and demand. The same kids who once mocked him started seeking him out for trades. Transaction by transaction, he built confidence. He learned how to read people, negotiate deals, and recognize genuine value. By 17, school no longer felt like the right path. In 1999, he left Green Valley High School and chose to earn his GED instead. He took whatever jobs he could find, including work at a comic shop where he stocked shelves and helped customers track down old issues. The shop was a gathering place for collectors, gamers, and people drawn to the same world he loved. There, he handled vintage items, talked to buyers, and learned firsthand what rarity and demand really meant. For Chumlee, that shop taught him more than any classroom ever could. Not every lesson came easily. At 15, he made a poor decision that nearly derailed him. He tried to sell a stolen bicycle part at a flea market. He was caught and punished, spending months grounded. The experience humiliated and frightened him, forcing him to confront the consequences of cutting corners. Rather than pushing him away from buying and selling, it pushed him toward doing it the right way. He learned how fragile reputation is and how honesty matters. After that incident, he never crossed that line again. Everything shifted the day he met Corey Harrison. Both boys were around 8 years old, growing up in the same Henderson neighborhood. What began as a simple friendship built around video games and collectibles slowly turned into a bond that would last for decades. Corey's family owned the gold and silver pawn shop, which had opened its doors in 1989, and Chumlee spent increasing amounts of time around that world. At the time, he had no idea how deeply it would shape his future. In 2000, at 18 years old, Corey brought him into the pawn shop just to look at old comic books. But while he browsed, Chumlee watched Rick Harrison negotiate over a vintage Atari console, ultimately striking a deal at $150. That moment changed everything. Watching the negotiation unfold sparked something inside him. Every object carried a story. Every deal was a problem waiting to be solved. From that point on, he wanted to understand how the entire system worked. By 2001, he was volunteering at the shop unpaid. He organized shelves of old Nintendo games, sifted through dusty boxes of comics, and inspected collectibles for damage. One day, he noticed something off about a He-Man figure that nearly fooled everyone. Rick confirmed it was counterfeit and handed Chumlee the day's tips as a reward. That small gesture was a turning point. It showed Rick that Chumlee had a natural ability to spot fakes and hidden gems. In 2002, Chumlee made his first true contribution. A customer brought in a Super Mario Bros. Cartridge that he immediately recognized as rare. He urged Rick to buy for $200, marking the moment when Chumlee stopped being just a helper and began becoming part of the business itself. Rick hesitated, weighing the risk, but Chumlee never wavered. He trusted what he saw. The shop went through with the purchase, and not long after, the cartridge sold for $800. Chumlee earned a $50 commission, modest on paper, but enormous in what it meant to him. More than the money, it gave him something he hadn't fully felt before: confidence. For the first time, he believed he truly belonged behind that counter. Years later, that early win would even be retold on Pawn Stars, a reminder of the moment when he stopped feeling like an outsider looking in. But the pawn world wasn't just about victories. Chumlee also witnessed how quickly things could turn volatile. During one tense exchange, a customer stormed into an argument over a Civil War-era pistol. The man was convinced the firearm was authentic and priceless. Rick disagreed. Voices rose, tempers flared, and the atmosphere shifted from business to confrontation in seconds. Watching from the sidelines, Chumlee was shaken. Yet the experience burned a lesson into him. Knowledge mattered, caution mattered, and a single disagreement could ignite chaos if you weren't prepared. In 2003, when Chumlee turned 21, he was officially hired at the gold and silver pawn shop. His starting wage was $8 an hour. He tested gold chains with acid kits, processed pawn tickets, and worked the counter day after day. The job wasn't glamorous, but it was relentless in what it taught him. Every shift added another layer of experience. Slowly, he stopped being Corey's friend and became part of the crew. Without realizing it, those quiet, repetitive years were shaping him for something far bigger, a future where cameras would capture the name he once resented. By 2004, his real education began in earnest. Chumlee was still relatively quiet then, learning the rhythm of the shop. Every morning at 9, the routine started the same way. Trucks rolled in unexpectedly, stacked with storage unit auction hauls. Sometimes there were hundreds of items dumped together: rusted tools, boxes of forgotten toys, comic book stacks, and the unmistakable smell of dust and age. He had to work fast, sorting piles and estimating value on instinct. On good days, he negotiated entire boxes of vintage comics for under $100. The work was exhausting. Heavy lifting, long hours, and moments when he felt more like a mover than a pawn employee. But that grind shaped him. He learned how to spot hidden value inside what most people dismissed as junk. Those early years became the foundation that later made him invaluable when the show needed someone who understood storage units better than anyone else in the room. In 2005, he had his first major breakthrough. A vintage 1970s Star Wars lightsaber toy came into the shop. Instead of passing it to Rick or Corey, Chumlee trusted his instincts. He paid $300 for it. Collectors tried to pressure him, insisting it was worthless, hoping to scare him into backing down. He didn't budge. When the shop eventually sold it for around $3,000, the profit alone boosted monthly numbers by nearly 20%. That was the moment Chumlee stopped seeing himself as just an employee. He realized he could recognize what others overlooked. Word spread, first inside the shop, then among local collectors. For the first time, he saw a future he could actively shape. But the pawn business has a way of humbling people fast. In 2006, Chumlee bought a Rolex for $1,200, convinced it was real. Rick examined it, immediately identified it as fake, and erupted. It was the first time Chumlee heard Rick say, "You're fired," with genuine anger behind it. The mistake cost the shop $900. Even after Chumlee sold the counterfeit watch for $30 to reduce the loss, he apologized repeatedly until Rick finally cooled down. Rick let him stay, but the damage was done. The lesson stayed with him forever. From that point on, Chumlee double-checked everything. He never forgot how easily confidence could turn into disaster under pressure. By 2007, he had matured enough that Rick began trusting him with higher-value items. Well-known collectors came through the doors, and Chumlee was often the one handling their pieces. When an authentic Elvis Presley belt buckle arrived, he authenticated it and sold it for $500 without hesitation. He also took on a behind-the-scenes role, helping transition the shop's inventory into its early digital system, organizing records in ways the business had never done before. While viewers would later see a goofy personality on television, inside the store, Chumlee was becoming essential to its daily operation. In 2008, he decided to change something personal as well. He began using the small gym inside the pawn shop and lost 50 pounds over the year. The physical change brought confidence. He felt better speaking with customers, more comfortable in his own skin. Rick noticed and raised his pay to $12 an hour. For Chumlee, it was a major step forward. More than the raise, it felt like respect. That year marked a turning point. He was becoming the version of himself the public would later meet, someone who laughed easily but worked relentlessly when no one was watching. By the time filming began in July 2009, Chumlee already had 5 solid years of experience behind a counter. When he walked into the producer's audition, he didn't plan anything. He simply reacted. Spotting a Pac-Man arcade machine, he started haggling with the producers as if they were customers. He cracked jokes, argued price, and played off the moment naturally. The room erupted with laughter. His timing wasn't rehearsed. It was instinctive. He was cast immediately. He wasn't meant to be the star. He was just Corey's childhood friend who grew up inside the shop. Yet somehow, without trying, he became the heart of the show. When the first season aired across 2009 and 2010, Chumlee appeared in 10 of the 16 episodes. One of the most memorable scenes showed him nervously buying a 1960s Beatles album for $150, equal parts excitement and fear written across his face. Audiences connected instantly. They didn't just see a pawn employee. They saw someone real. Each episode of the first season drew in roughly 2.7 million viewers, and something unexpected began to happen. A surprising amount of fan mail arrived, much of it addressed directly to Chumlee. Audiences connected with his straightforward humor and the way he came across as genuine on camera. His rise was sudden, and he had no real sense yet of how far it would go. What most people didn't see was the work he put in once the cameras shut off. Late at night, he studied antique price guides, memorized values, and replayed mistakes in his head. During the filming of a Civil War sword appraisal, he stumbled over his lines so badly that production had to reshoot the scene 5 times. He hated being the reason things slowed down, but he refused to walk away. That persistence reshaped how people saw him. Slowly, the goofy clerk became someone viewers respected for trying to improve. By the end of Season 2 in 2010, his life looked nothing like it had before. His income jumped from about $25,000 a year at the pawn shop to nearly $100,000 thanks to the show. He bought his first car, a 1995 Mustang, and began building a serious video game collection. The money brought independence, and that independence fed his confidence. Years later, when he would become a multimillionaire, it was those first checks that mattered most. They were proof that his life had truly changed direction. That same year, he began meeting fans face to face. At small Las Vegas events, he signed autographs and lingered longer than expected, especially with kids or nervous collectors. At one appearance, a fan handed him a rare Nintendo Zelda cartridge worth around $400. It was a simple gift, but it stayed with him. He kept it as a reminder of the distance he had traveled, from sorting dusty boxes in 2004 to becoming someone people admired enough to bring gifts. In 2011, he surprised viewers again. Walking into the shop, he presented a 1920s-style Tommy gun replica he had purchased for $2,500. Many expected another mistake. Instead, experts confirmed it was a quality replica valued at roughly $5,000. When it sold at that price, Rick Harrison smiled and offered rare praise. Fans loved seeing Chumlee overturn expectations and trust his own judgment. That single deal shifted how many people viewed him. The following year pushed his visibility even further. In 2012, he appeared as himself on Nickelodeon's iCarly episode, I lost my head in Vegas, standing alongside Rick and Corey in front of nearly 4 million young viewers. The scene mirrored the pawnshop's energy, playful, chaotic, and light, as he haggled over a prop sword. Kids began quoting him online, turning small moments into memes. For the first time, he felt the strange weight of being recognized by people who had never watched Pawn Stars. By 2013, episodes were pulling in around 3.5 million viewers, and one crossover moment stood out. During a Duck Dynasty collaboration, Chumlee traded a bundle of duck calls for $300. The deal itself was simple, but the reaction wasn't. Fans from both shows flooded social media, delighted by the collision of pawnshop chaos and bearded hunters. Chumlee's relaxed, fun energy carried the moment, and ratings climbed on both sides. In 2014, his name was strong enough that he tested a new idea. He launched his own line of t-shirts. Fans bought them quickly, 10,000 shirts at $20 each, earning him around $150,000 in profit. The money helped improve the shop and proved he could turn popularity into business. Some shirts were later resold online at higher prices, treated almost like collectibles. By 2015, everything built toward a moment few expected. Chumlee purchased a genuine Picasso sketch for $10,000. After authentication, the piece went to auction and sold for $25,000. For longtime viewers, it felt like a turning point. The man once laughed at for simple mistakes was now handling high-stakes art. Even serious collectors took notice. For a moment, it felt like he had fully earned his place. But beneath those wins were losses that cut deeply. Years earlier, before the show aired, back in 2008, Chumlee had spent $155,000 of his own savings on what he believed was a rare upright bass. When an expert examined it, the verdict was devastating, a complete fake. The loss wiped out everything he had saved and created a painful rift between him and Corey Harrison. Fans learned about it later, and the story became part of Pawn Stars lore, a reminder of how quickly trust can fracture when money is involved. Chumlee later admitted he had no business buying such an expensive instrument. The mistake haunted him for years. He stumbled again in 2012 during Season 5, overpaying for an unattractive guitar. He put down $3,500 too much, and once it was appraised as counterfeit, the shop lost $2,000. Rick scolded him on camera, and the moment stuck with viewers. It became one of the show's clearest warnings about buying without knowledge. Chumlee laughed it off publicly, but the mistake hurt more than the cameras showed. The following year brought another blow. In 2013, he bought 3 Rolex watches for $4,000, convinced he had found a bargain. Experts later confirmed all 3 were fake. The fallout led the shop to implement a new rule. Chumlee was barred from handling luxury purchases unless an expert was present. Fans joked about it, but the embarrassment was real. It forced him to confront a hard truth. Confidence without precision could be dangerous. In 2014, tensions rose again when he pushed to buy an arcade machine despite an expert's warning. The machine turned out to be faulty, costing the shop $1,500. Each setback chipped away at him, reinforcing the same lesson the pawn world had been teaching him since the beginning. Success wasn't about luck or personality alone. It demanded discipline, restraint, and respect for what you didn't yet know. Rick confronted him on camera, and the tension was unmistakable. What began as a routine disagreement quickly turned into a defining moment. Fans argued endlessly about who was right, but inside the shop, the impact was immediate. Procedures changed. Electronics were inspected differently from that day forward. The scene became a lesson in how stubbornness, paired with confidence, could turn a simple purchase into a very public problem. By 2015, the pressure was starting to show. The weight of fame, criticism, and repeated mistakes took a visible toll. Chumlee had gained nearly 30 pounds, and online commentary turned cruel. Memes multiplied. Jokes hardened into insults. Even Rick teased him on screen, which only amplified the noise. Eventually, Chumlee made a quiet but important decision. He began therapy, using the money he earned from the show to address stress, self-image, and the mental strain of constant attention. He didn't pretend everything was fine, and for many fans who recognized that struggle, it made him feel more human than ever. But the incident that haunted him most traced back to 2010, during a slow afternoon at the gold and silver pawn shop. Chumlee leaned a pawned upright bass against a shelf and walked away without thinking twice. The instrument had been pawned for only $700, but it was old, delicate, and far more valuable than it appeared. Seconds later, it slid, struck the floor, and cracked apart in full view of the shop. The sound stopped everything. Staff froze. Customers turned. Even people passing by glanced in. The first repair estimate came back at $20,000. Not the exaggerated $200,000 rumor that later spread online, but still catastrophic for a single pawn item. When Rick Harrison arrived and saw the damage, the anger filled the room. He pulled Chumlee into the office and sent him home immediately. Later, Rick told him the repair cost would come out of his own savings. Chumlee paid every dollar. The incident never aired, but it didn't stay secret. The story spread among staff, leaked into fan forums, and grew into one of the most infamous behind-the-scenes moments in Pawn Stars history. The base's owner demanded full compensation and threatened legal action. The shop tried to settle matters through repairs, but the pressure escalated. Lawsuit rumors followed. When a reporter later asked Chumlee about it, he gave a quiet shrug and said, "I don't know what I was thinking." That single sentence was repeated endlessly, turned into headlines and memes, painting him as careless rather than human. Behind closed doors, lawyers stepped in. A settlement was reached to avoid a public trial. But the damage inside the shop lingered. Rick acted quickly. Chumlee was barred from handling musical instruments for months and missed 2 episodes because he couldn't participate in normal shop activity. He was required to undergo retraining on handling, storage, and safety protocols. Among the staff, the laughter stopped. This was the moment his goofy reputation stopped being harmless. Trust had to be rebuilt, piece by piece. Then, in 2016, everything darkened. On March 9th, police raided Chumlee's Las Vegas home while investigating a sexual assault allegation. That claim was not supported by evidence. But during the search, officers found something else entirely. Nearly 5 ounces of marijuana, methamphetamine, Xanax, drug paraphernalia, 12 firearms scattered throughout the house. Some were registered, others were not. Among them was a fully automatic MP5-style weapon that looked ripped from an action movie. They also discovered a locked floor vault beneath his bedroom. Inside was a private room with a dance pole. The detailed tabloid seized instantly. Overnight, the image of the harmless, awkward pawn shop employee shattered. Fans were forced to confront how far his private life had drifted from the character they thought they knew. The charges were severe. 20 felony counts involving drugs and weapons. His bail was set at $62,000, which he paid the next day. If all charges had stuck, he faced decades in prison, some estimates climbing as high as 70 years. Rick Harrison spoke publicly, saying the shop stood by him, but offered few details. Behind the scenes, the reality was stark. Chumlee was closer to losing everything than anyone realized. As news spread, the internet exploded. The vault, the guns, the drugs. Every detail fueled speculation. The History Channel quietly paused several episodes. Fans wondered if this was the end, if Chumlee would vanish from television entirely. The investigation continued until May 2016, when a plea deal was reached. Chumlee pleaded guilty to 1 felony gun charge and 1 misdemeanor drug charge. There was no jail time. Instead, he received 3 years of probation, mandatory counseling, and was required to surrender all weapons and seized evidence. If he stayed out of trouble, the felony would eventually be erased. The deal didn't erase the damage, but it pulled him back from the edge. Slowly, the tension eased. In 2017, Chumlee returned to Pawn Stars. Despite rumors that he had been fired, Corey Harrison publicly defended him, speaking about loyalty and the complicated cost of fame. On camera, Chumlee was quieter, more careful, but he remained part of the shop and the show. The History Channel reintegrated him into regular episodes, and over time, fans accepted him again. He rebuilt his life beyond television as well. In May 2017, he opened Chumlee's Candy on the Boulevard, right next to the pawn shop. The store sold retro sweets from the 1970s, 80s, and 90s, and it pulled in roughly $500,000 in its first year. Tourists moved seamlessly from the pawn shop into the candy store, buying autographed treats and colorful drinks. It became an attraction of its own, proof he could build something independent of the cameras. By the early 2020s, he was back on the road with Rick and Corey filming Pawn Stars Do America. In 2022, he made headlines for a Pokemon card deal worth $1,200, impressing collectors with how sharp and disciplined his negotiation sounded. The show leaned deeper into pop culture collectibles, Pokemon, Magic cards, and rare gaming items, where Chumlee was known to take calculated risks and still surprise longtime fans. By 2025, his net worth had climbed to around $5 million. Each episode paid roughly $25,000. His business ventures continued to grow. The journey wasn't clean or easy. It was marked by mistakes, losses, and near collapse. But step by step, Chumlee proved something the pawn world teaches better than any other place. Value isn't just about what you buy or sell. Sometimes it's about what you survive. Residual income continued to accumulate after more than a decade on television. What once looked fractured and unstable had been rebuilt piece by piece, with chaos transformed into something sustainable and profitable. At this stage of his life, the majority of his earnings no longer came from the pawn counter itself, but from businesses he owned, public appearances, and the long shadow cast by years of exposure on television. Away from the spotlight, his personal life began to find equilibrium as well. In 2018, he became engaged to Olivia Caputo, marking a quieter chapter that contrasted sharply with the turmoil of earlier years. He remained sober throughout and beyond his probation period, continued therapy, and leaned on support groups to regain stability after the raid. Instead of burying stress or pushing through recklessly, he learned to confront it directly. Those small, disciplined habits, built in private rather than on camera, became the foundation that kept him from repeating past mistakes and allowed him to build a life that finally felt steady again.